in. So welcome everyone. This is Jamie Line with WSP. As most of you know, we are helping the Illinois Soybean Association with a bridge bundling education effort here in Illinois. This is our fourth working group meeting and fourth webinar on this topic. We are very grateful for all of you who are joining us, especially the folks from Ohio today, who Kate will introduce a little bit more here in a few minutes. Let's just go through our agenda here real quick. Next, thank you. We're going to go ahead and start with introductions. I just kind of handled that for myself. Kate, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself since you're going to be moderating the session today?
Yeah, hi, my name is Kate Goshal, and I work with Jamie and with Deborah Brown at WSP, and I'm on the alternative delivery team, and I'll be moderating the conversation today. Thanks.
Everyone else, please feel free to jump in and introduce yourself with your name and your organization, and feel free to mention your role as well.
Good afternoon. This is Deborah Brown with WSP, and I am part of the team previously mentioned that is working with Soybean Association and interested stakeholders in Illinois to socialize the concept of bridge bundling.
And this is Scott Sigmund, the Transport and Infrastructure Lead for the Illinois Soybean Association. Thank you all for joining us.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Dean Ringel, the Executive Director for the County Engineers Association of Ohio. And I will just confess to the Illinois people that I spent my formative years growing up in Edwardsville, Illinois. So I'm a past Illini.
Thanks, Dean. Why don't we do the rest of the Ohio DOT and the County Engineers Association folks.
It's Tim Keller. I'm the State Bridge Engineer for Ohio.
I'm Andrea Stevenson, Office of Local Programs.
Jeff Payton, Office of Local Programs.
I'm Rachel Levy. I'm with Ohio Division Federal Highway Administration.
Okay, everyone else on the line, if you want to go ahead and jump in and start introducing yourselves, please.
Yeah, I'm Colin Waters, the Export and Logistics Director at Illinois Corn Growers Association.
Holly Rockford, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of County Engineers.
Hi, Charmaine Crook with Federal Highway Administration.
Bob Perkins with the IDOT Bridge Office.
This is Dan Brittle, Federal Highway Administration, Illinois Division Bridge Engineer.
Ben Brockschmidt, Illinois American Water, and member of the Illinois State Freight Advisory Committee.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Holly Beeman with IDOT, Bureau Chief of Planning.
This is Kenny Tall from Federal Highway Ohio Division. I'm the Division Bridge Engineer.
Michelle Risco with the County Engineers Association of Ohio.
This is Mike Smart. I'm the Field Engineering Manager, the Illinois Division Office.
This is Bill Bodine, Director of Business and Regulatory Affairs for the Illinois Farm Bureau.
Kirby Wagner with Farm Bureau as well.
Okay, excellent. Looks like
this is Jamali Grinawi with WSP, a bridge engineer in Chicago.
Thanks, Jamal. Anyone else on the line who wants to introduce themselves before we go ahead and move forward?
Sure, Jamie. Ryan Hanks is here. I'm with WSP. I'm currently the General Engineering Consultant for the Illinois Tollway.
Thanks, Ryan.
Craig Fink, Tazewell County, Illinois Association of County Engineers.
Good afternoon, Mike Steenek, Soy Transportation Coalition.
This is Neil Adams with IDOT, Bureau of Innovative Project Delivery.
All right, sounds good. I think we covered most people. Looks like we've got about 36 folks on the line so far. Again, I just want to thank our guests for joining us today. We're really looking forward to this conversation with Ohio DOT and the County Engineers Association regarding their experience with bridge bundling. As I mentioned, Kate will do a little more detailed introductions of our guests today here in a few minutes. But before we get started with the presentation and the conversation, I just want to go through a couple of other things with folks. First, I just want to mention that we will be having our next webinar meeting on July 23rd at 1:30 in the afternoon Central Time. Within the next couple of days, we will send out the presentation and the notes from today's meeting, along with the next calendar invite for the July 23rd meeting. So keep an eye out for that. And then I do want to mention too that we are getting ready to send out a survey to all of you and the other folks who are on the working group mailing list for this effort. The survey is going to be done through MetroQuest, and you'll see a link to it here on the screen. We'll be sending that link out to each of you after today's call as well. And the purpose of this is really just as we move into our next couple of education seminar initiatives, we want to make sure that we're covering the types of things that people are really finding or will find useful and that are really answering the questions that you do still have or may still have regarding what bundling could mean in Illinois. So this is kind of what the survey, the main page of the survey is going to look like when you click on the link. If you haven't used MetroQuest before, you will find it's fairly easy to use. So we do encourage you to please take the survey, and also please pass it along to anyone else who you think might be interested in this topic. We'd really like to see, you know, as broad array of responses as we can get, so that we can make sure that we're spending the next couple of meetings focusing on any of the remaining questions or topics that people would like to see us covering. In order to make sure that we're really getting, you know, making sure that folks are getting the most that they can out of this education and socialization initiative. Kate, I don't know if you were able to load it for us to show the MetroQuest survey.
Yes. Bear with me for just a moment. I'm going to open it up now. Can you see the screen now?
I can.
Okay, great. So this is what we just wanted to show you what the tabs look like. Can you see the browser?
Nope, I'm sorry. I'm still just seeing the PowerPoint.
Oh, really? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare. Let me know when you see it.
I think I see it.
Okay, great. Excellent. So we just wanted to show people what this looked like when you tab through it. It's pretty cool, I think. And it has some good instructions on how to start. So here you can see I'm just answering the questions, but it's pretty interactive. I hope I'm not messing up the results, Jamie, by putting in these answers.
It's okay.
We'll find out now.
Yeah, and we can screen them out too. So
yeah, exactly. Great. So as you can see, it's like really easy to tab through. But just wanted to give everybody just like a sense of what this looked like. So now I'm going to flip back to the deck.
Perfect. And then as you get into the survey, and again, please do feel free to send it out to others as well. If you have any questions about it, you can call Adam at the number listed there, that 312-981 number, and we'll be happy to walk you through anything you might need help with. So, but looking forward to seeing the results and helping utilize, having those give us a little more guidance on what we can focus on during future meetings and future conversations. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Kate, and she's going to just kind of do a quick overview of why we're talking about this again, and then introduce our guests today from Ohio. So thanks, Kate.
Great. Yeah. I mean, I think we've covered the why behind our working group a couple of times, but since there are some new people on the line, we just wanted to show some of the stats from our infographic that the working group has developed, just to highlight the need for repair in the state of Illinois. And a lot of the bridges are in poor or worse condition in rural areas that not only impact mobility, but also to impact economic competitiveness. So as products are trying to move from Illinois producers to the marketplace. So we've formed this working group to explore bridge bundling as a possible solution. And so we reached out to a number of project owners, so other state DOTs and entities that are managing programs that could be replicated or programs that we could learn from. And so that's the reason why we reached out to the Ohio Department of Transportation and their Ohio Bridge Replacement Program. And I believe it's the Ohio Bridge Partnership Program. Got to get my acronym right. So for today's discussion, as I said, we've got Ohio DOT on the line, along with their County Engineers Association. So we have Andrea Stevenson, who's the administrator of the ODOT Office of Local Programs, Tim Keller, the administrator of ODOT's Office of Structures, Jeff Payton, from ODOT's Office of Local Programs and Local Let and Capital Programs, and he's a supervisor of that. And then from the County Engineers Association, we're lucky to have Dean Ringel, who's the president and executive director, and Michelle Risco, who's the program manager. So what we're going to do now is have Andrea present for a little bit on what it is, like what is the Ohio Bridge Partnership Program, and then we're going to have some moderated discussion, so it'll feel like a conference panel, so less PowerPoint heavy, more video, and we'll learn a little bit more about how this program came together. The benefit of having all of these folks on the line here is that they all have known each other for a long time, that they've been around since the inception of the program in 2013, so they can really talk to us about how this program was structured and then how it's evolved over time. And we'll be able to draw some parallels between Illinois situation and what's occurred in Ohio. And I hope that we can walk away with some great lessons learned. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea to do her presentation.
Thank you, Kate. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the state of Illinois. And on behalf of the Ohio Department of Transportation, thank you so much for inviting us to participate in your work group today. So looking forward to the moderated session is where we can help answer some of your questions. So we're gonna go ahead and get started for about 10 or 15 minutes here. Just give you some historical background as to how we got started and where we have really come in the last 6 or 7 years with the program, because it has evolved as finances and funding and bridges have been replaced. And so we'll go through that change that we've experienced over the last few years. So initially the program was kind of initiated in 2013. In the fall, our governor, who was then Governor Kasich, Governor DeWine is our governor now, announced that he really wanted to be aggressive about investing some money into the bridges across the state. And historically, we had already really addressed some of the structurally deficient bridges that were on the state system. And so we were looking as to how we could really help the locals build up their bridges and ensure that they were structurally safe. And you know, that we were doing everything we could for the motorists of the state. So we invested $120 million to repair and replace about 200 bridges across the state. And these bridges were owned by both the county and the cities. And it was something that we felt was very important. And so we progressed forward with that. Our commitment was to get these bridges replaced and repaired within a 3-year period, which was very, very aggressive. The interesting thing about this was our governor wanted the first batch of them really to be done by July 1st of 2014. And so with it being October of 2013, we had to move very quickly. And the team that's on the line here with me this afternoon were the ones who really helped initiate all of this. So looking at what does our inventory of bridges look like on the local system, 27,460 bridges that met the federal definition. On the average, our bridges are in really great shape in the state of Ohio, but there were many of them that were in need of repair. And I think if I remember correctly, one of our original lists had about 900 bridges on it that were on the waiting list to receive some work, get rehabilitated or replaced. Since it was quite a long list, and with $120 million, we knew we were not going to be able to get to all of those. Our objective was to address the immediate needs, look at those with the low-hanging fruit, which ones could we really fix most quickly with the money that we had available, and had the most traffic on it, where we can be the most impactful. We wanted quick and effective solutions, and we really wanted to keep it simple. Next slide, please. So here you'll see a picture of one of the bridges that was actually replaced in the program. Our expectations were to really deliver a safe bridge system, make sure the bridges were of great quality, but at the same time, we had really a no-nonsense delivery approach. We had a very short time frame. We didn't have time to have a lot of project slowdowns. And so we were very focused on picking those bridges, at least the first ones in 2014, that we could get delivered very quickly and get to construction. We had a design build concept that we wanted to initiate, and we worked very closely with the county engineers and the construction team that we had here in Ohio to make sure that we were progressing the way we needed to be doing that. We sold the bridges in packages. I think our largest package was 6 bridges. And then of course we had some that were sold as single bridges, maybe because they were a little bit bigger or they were a little more complicated as we got into the second and third subsequent years of the program. As we knew we had a very short time frame, we needed some help. We needed some staffing resources at the department to help manage these projects and these bridges. So we hired some consultants to help do the PE and right-of-way and environmental work, and to get the scopes developed for those particular projects. So part of that funding was used to help hire those consultants. And so not only did we hire those consultants, but they had to help us with a variety of components of the project. We had a multidisciplinary team. We had a project management consultant who helped us with many of this, which we had to get approval for from FHWA, and FHWA was great in being a partner and supporting us in this endeavor as well. Next slide, please. So these were our partners with the Ohio Bridge Partnership Program. First and foremost was the County Engineers Association of Ohio, and that's why we have them on the line today. They were going to be the greatest beneficiary from this program, and we had municipalities as well. Originally, we thought, you know, hey, we're just going to have county bridges fixed, and from a spreading of the wealth and making sure that we were addressing many of the locals' needs, we decided to bring the municipalities in. The Ohio General Assembly was great in supporting this endeavor, and then the Ohio Contractors Association, our AC, EC stakeholders, and MPOs across the state. Here you see a bridge that was in Pickaway County, Ohio, and it was one of the replacement bridges in a very rural part of the state. And it's a beautiful bridge, and we were very happy to be able to do these kinds of things all throughout the state of Ohio. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just some quick facts as to how we administered the program. The projects were financed over 10 years with federal Garvey bonds, and we utilized toll revenue credit as the local match. And so toll revenue credit was revenue that was obtained from the Ohio Turnpike Commission. They reinvested those funds in infrastructure projects, and then we were the beneficiary of that credit. And that's an agreement that we have set up with the Ohio Turnpike and the department. The bridges were always owned by the locals, and after we did the work, they continued to be owned by the locals. And so the locals had an obvious ownership interest in this, and they had input on the scopes as we developed them for the design build contracts. While we love to build beautiful fancy bridges, this was not the concept here. The point of this was to build those bridges that were going to serve the purpose of the traveling public, and they were not going to be, the high caliber fancy kind of bridges that you might see in suburban areas or other places. They were to get the job done and to serve the purpose. We did provide some accommodations and local preferences on these bridges, not all of them, but where there was a need to do that, we did that. And Tim can address that maybe later when we have our Q&A session. Next slide, please. With that, this kind of gives you some idea as to what our schedule looked like and the number of bridges we awarded and the dollar value associated with this. And so I do want to say the original bridges, the original 223 bridges were 100% funded. So the locals did not have to pay anything with this. And so they were recipients of bridges that the department paid for. Phase 1, state fiscal years 14, 15, and 16. 14 was the year we had to do the quickest turnaround. We were able to award 209 bridges, and that was the greatest sum of funding that we had there at $97.5 million. You can see the other phases. In this case, in state fiscal year 15 and 16, we got into the more complicated bridges because we knew we had more time to get those delivered. And so the easier ones were delivered in fiscal year 14, where the more difficult ones came along in 15, 16, and 17. And here we see phase 2 and phase 3. Those are just simply some of the more complicated bridges that we had. And we also ended up having some extra funds. And so we were able to put essentially 23 extra bridges into the program and get those completed with the money that we had available. So we sold, in addition to what we normally do in our state program and with the county engineers, we did an additional 228 bridges. Next slide, please. So that was really the first round of the Ohio Bridge Partnership Program. We found that because of the success of it, and I'm going to say the popularity with the Ohio General Assembly, they asked us when we went back for our biennium budget, which is the budget we go to for the department every 2 years to our General Assembly, they asked about continuing the program because they saw how quickly we were able to get that accomplished. And they asked that we continue the program, and they wanted to put a line item in for funding specifically for this program. At the department, we like to kind of dictate where the money goes and assign it to programs where we see there's a great need or where our performance measures are indicating funding needs to be spent. And so we ask that it not be put in as a line item, but that we commit and promise to continue the program. And so what we did, because we had spent the money and we were going to be paying down on these bridges for 10 years, we decided to dedicate $5 million per fiscal year into the future to continue the program on a much smaller scale, but to continue the commitment to the county system and to the municipalities. And so here you see what we've done. And Jeff is the one who really manages this program and selects these projects and works with Michelle. And so this is what we are continuing to do as a commitment from the original program that was set up. Next slide, please. So here are a few more long-term program facts and approaches to what we're doing. I talked about our commitment to the General Assembly. It was $5 million annually, and that's in addition to the $35 million annually that we already provide to the county system for bridges. So we have a bridge program that's $35 million, and in addition to that, they got an extra $5 million. So really $40 million a year for bridges on the local system. We wanted to maintain that simplicity, and we have done that, really trying to minimize the environmental and real estate and utility impacts for these bridges and trying to keep it simple where we can get the greatest bang for the buck in getting a bridge built. Like I said, it is eligible for cities and counties. And at this point in time, we only now pay for construction, where we originally paid for everything that went into the development of the bridge and the construction. Now it's just construction funds, and the locals apply for the funding rather than being selected by the department. Next slide, please. So with both the very large initial program of 223 bridges, we were able to realize some cost savings in a variety of ways. Looking back, there were opportunities to mobilize equipment and teams and construction crews. And when we actually have these projects bundled or packaged up in 3, 4, 5, or 6 projects, we tried to keep them in close proximity to each other, where contractors could realize the benefits of bidding on one package with multiple bridges in it. And so we tried to be very cognizant of that and aware of what those needs were from the contractor's perspective. In addition to that, as we were starting to develop these projects initially in 2013 and 14 and 15, the contractors were vocal about ensuring that not only were we packaging projects that would benefit large contractors, but also that the small family-owned contractors across the state would have an opportunity to bid on projects across the state and support their small companies. And so with that, we had a better range of bids, and we benefited, the department benefited from that, and the contractors benefited from that as well. So those were some things that we saw as cost savings, and we can elaborate on that a little bit more when we have the Q&A. Next slide, please. With that, Tim, early in the process, when we were still working through the initial 223 projects, we really wanted to get a sense as to what the locals were thinking about the administration of the program, how it was working, were we seeing savings and those kinds of things. And so he set up a lessons learned work group with some locals. And so these are some of the things that we felt that we learned. Of course, through the course of time, we've learned a lot more. And we really felt like early on we were able to avoid some of the right-of-way relocation and utility conflicts. But as we got further into the second, third, and fourth year, we found that some of them did get very complicated, just like you might experience on a normal project. And we were faced with that, and maybe a little more coordination with that. But that was something that was very real and that we experienced. The contractors did a great job. The bridges were simple. There were minimal issues, and so the contractors and the locals, I think, both felt that it went very well. Like I mentioned earlier, the locally owned bridges, they were maintained by the locals. The responsibility was on the locals because they owned those bridges. And even though we administered the contracts and we did a majority of the work and we let them through the ODOT process, they were always in the locals' ownership. With early in the program, because we were in such a hurry to get these projects out on the street and completed by October of 2014, we were really pushing into cold weather with some of the paving and some of the work that had to be done. And so timing was everything for us as we pushed into winter. And so being mindful of those sorts of things, and being in Illinois, you're aware of that as well. Most locals received a bridge at no cost in the earlier phases. Later phases, the locals had to actually fund portions of the project. And so there's been pros and cons to many of these things that we did, and it's not perfect, but we feel like it went pretty well. And the ultimate objective was to help the locals get those bridges replaced. And so where we have bundling come in is, bundling the funding and, packaging up some projects together. And so you know, we tried to be innovative in what we were doing, but we also learned from other states, and we learned from Pennsylvania and some other places that helped us as well. And so it's been a good experience, and we've learned a lot, and we have fixed a lot of bridges, but there's still a lot out there to be done. And so with that, let's move to the next slide. Couple things here on our last slide. We felt we had a consistent approach to project development. We had a very aggressive time frame for getting projects to construction. It was almost like they almost had to be shovel ready and move very quickly. We had available funding to fix the bridges, so that was the first thing we did. How do we get the funding? Where do we get the funding? And when will the funding be ready to actually, you know, do the work that needs to get done? And so those were some of the things that we had available to us. The project was administered and led by the central office. Our districts did a majority of the work. We have 12 districts across the state. They are essentially like boots on the ground and the grassroots effort. And so we led the effort, we received the funding, we hired the consultants and worked with them, but the districts really worked with the locals to help get the program delivered. And with that, in the fall of 2017, we celebrated our 200th bridge being completed. We invited all of our stakeholders to that celebration with us. And it was a great time, and it was a great way to celebrate the accomplishment and the bridges. So with that, we're going to move to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kate. I appreciate the opportunity to share a few details with you, and we'll transition to the moderated questions.
Great, excellent. Thanks so much, Andrea. I appreciate your presentation and kind of giving us the lay of the land. So I'm going to ask all the ODOT speakers and the Ohio County Engineers Association speakers to put on your cameras because I'm not going to share my screen anymore. So here we are. Hi, all of our smiling faces. Wonderful. Hello. Great. So we have some questions. We're going to kind of roll through them. We got a question from Ben Benjamin, and Ben, that's actually on similar questions on my list. We're going to get to that question in just a moment or two. So this is how it's going to work. I'm going to ask a couple of like prepared questions, just like we're at a conference and this is a panel. And then as we're going through them, if you have questions to submit or to ask, feel free to use the chat box. You can also unmute yourself and just interrupt. We'd be happy to get an interruption. And then we'll have some more dedicated time after the end of the moderated questions to answer any questions that those in the working group have. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dean first. So Dean, you're the president and executive director of the County Engineers Association. It'd be great to hear your perspective on the why of this program. So what kind of conditions were county engineers dealing with at the time? And like, why was this important to the county engineers?
So that's a good question to start off with. Number one, the county engineers in Ohio have by number, the largest number of bridges of any of the government entities that have to oversee their bridges. But we also have some of the least funding set up. So we were kind of in a no-win situation with bridges continuing to get older, deteriorating as years go on, without a good funding source or additional funds that have been available. So when this opportunity came up to work with the state, that was a great opportunity for the counties to try to get a little bit better foothold. Now, you know, we had over 4,000 bridges that were in need of some repair. So 200 is a small part, but 200 is also a lot when you're looking at that. So there's some, I know one of the other questions coming up, Tim and I are going to probably jointly talk about how the bridges were selected and all that. But in general, it was a good boost, a good shot in the arm to get going where we could then show the state legislatures what the needs were, tell a message, show that this was important to get started, but we needed some additional funds, and we used it to help justify getting those different funds through the legislature.
So to follow on that, did the County Engineers Association, it sounded like you provided some education then to state lawmakers. Is that how the governor kind of came up with the idea? Or I've also heard it described like, you know, it was an election year. He was motivated for lots of reasons to have some banner projects in the state of Ohio. Like, how did it get to the governor's office?
Well, I think the easiest answer to that is that we probably had a couple county bridges around where he lives personally that were in need of repair. And I think that was a firsthand visual knowledge that he could grasp his hands around and say, we need to do something about it.
Yeah, there's so many similarities between, well, not only with how Ohio handles their bridges, you know, the type of work expected from county engineers as well as from the DOT, but also too just like the state of repair that's needed. I think a lot of our Illinois stakeholders probably can sympathize with that. A lot of people can look out their door and see a bridge in their neighborhood that needs repair. Great. Well, let's move on to the next question. So, Andrea, you talked about how the bridge program was initially funded, and you described accessing federal Garvey bonds, the toll revenue credit match. I was wondering if you could just describe like how you all came to the determination to use those types of financing tools, and how did you consider other types of financing or delivery methods?
One of the things we actually did is we worked with our finance team very closely. And while we were working on trying to get the bridges delivered, they were tasked with come up with a strategy to fund these projects and see what kind of opportunities are out there. And so with that, the Garvey bonds were available. We have a lot of great ways of doing innovative financing at the department. And so the Garvey bonds seem to be the best because we could get the funding immediately to finance the work for the bridges and the construction funding and finance it over a 10-year period. And so the department has a great, I'm going to say, credit history. We've bonded a lot of projects and a lot of things over the course of time. And so going out and accessing and requesting Garvey bonds seemed to be the best option. So like I said, it was over a 10-year period. It was 100% federal funding. The Garvey bonds paid for the 80%, while the toll revenue credit is the soft match and pays for the 20%. And so I explained how the toll revenue credit is really derived and how we get that. And from there, we were able to combine the two together and really make it work so that the locals during the initial phases did not have to really expend any money. That was local money. And so it worked out very well. So Garvey bonds stand for Grant Anticipation Revenue Vehicles. And that sounds like a kind of an odd name, but that's what it is. And toll revenue credit is TRC for short. So if you hear us make those references, that's what we're talking about. But it was a good fit. And I think at this point, we probably have, let's see, maybe 4 to 5 years left to pay on the bridges.
Wow, great. That's really helpful to understand. And as a follow-up to that, so was the bridge bundling concept kind of wild within the Ohio Department of Transportation? Like, what did you have to like overcome any barriers to kind of come up with a concept? Or, I mean, I also know too, Ohio has a pretty good P3 statute already in place.
Right.
But like, was that hard to overcome? Like, kind of coming up with this idea for bundled bridges?
Well, Pennsylvania had done it before us, and and there are neighbors on the other side, and so, I think there was a lot of consultation with them. I think some of the barriers that we had to overcome were maybe internal, where, we were not accustomed to grouping construction contracts together that were, 10 miles apart, or, and so it was, you know how they say, you know, that's the way we've always done it. It was overcoming that kind of philosophy and just really saying, okay, we're going to bundle these, we're going to sell them in groups. We may have to cross district lines to do inspections and do those kinds of things. So I think a lot of it was just a change to the way we had typically done business in some cases.
Yeah, that's great.
Andrea, if I could add to that, and I know Tim and I will be talking about some of this stuff later, but the fact of bridge bundling, it really worked best because you bundled similar bridges. It wasn't, you know, 8 bridges with 8 different designs. There was some consistency in the size and how the bridges were going to be designed that could afford a better price when you bundle them together for one contract. So that's just again, the idea of bundling was how can we get things grouped together that would actually save some money.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah,
Dean, thank you so much for following on to that. And do you happen to know all of these questions in advance? That sets us up so well for the next 2. So the next one actually goes to Tim. So Tim, and it's really building on this idea of, like, you know, how were the bridges selected, prioritized, grouped? And also too, this is tied to Ben's question. He asked if somebody could go into more detail on how smaller contractors were engaged and how bidding was approached. So Tim, my question to you is, you know, tell us more about how the program was structured so that it was responsive to Ohio's construction industry. And maybe you can touch a little bit on, like, how that impacted competition. Andrea mentioned that in her presentation as well.
Okay, thank you. To do that, I need to take a step back. And Illinois and Ohio are very similar in inventory. That's a good thing. That's very similar. What Ohio did back in starting about 85 to 97, we had what we called a bridge program at that point. And that was a program for Ohio bridges, DOT bridges. And what we did is we attacked those, we did about 300 bridges a year for 16, 17 years. And so in that process, and those were all on the 2-lane system, our general system, we call it, our 2-lane system, our farm to market routes. And when we did that, we created 2 areas. We created 2 industries. First, we created an industry of consultants that could design these small bridges. These are generally 50, 60, 70-foot bridges. They're not the big bridges. And 2 is we created a contracting industry that was used to building these type of bridges. So in the early 2000s, we moved away from these general system bridges. We still had them. We still bid them. We still bid them now. We moved into our urban corridors, our interstate systems, our rebuilding of the larger projects. And so when we first started this program, we did have a conversation about bundling, like Missouri did, like Pennsylvania did, put them all in together, done it as a large project. But when we did that, we were going to not include the small bridge contractors that we have out there. They were hungry for projects, and so what we decided to do was bundle it for financing. It was all financed and brought together through the financing piece, and then we made them smaller packages so that we could support the smaller bridge contractors in Ohio. And it's not atypical for us to put out a small 30, 40-foot bridge and get 6, 7, 8 bidders. And so when you get that kind of competition, it drives the pricing down. So that was a little bit of the background of how we got to this thing shaped like it is, because we have history, and not every state has that history. It doesn't work everywhere, but some of that history came to fruition with this program, in that we had 2 industry groups that were ready to go, could jump into this, and were actually hungry for these type of projects.
Yeah, that's great. It's great to hear about the type of appetite that the project or the program received, and probably receives still today. So, and the back history for that. And that's a great tie into the next question, which is to both Dean and Tim. So I'd love for you guys to talk about how the bridges are prioritized. And then after we cover that, we're going to hear from Jeff and Michelle, who are going to talk about, like, the actual nuts and bolts of it. But Dean and Tim, So how did they get prioritized? I mean, I feel like that's always a question when you're talking about bridge bundling. Like, how do they all come together? What kind of challenges did you guys encounter? Which is a polite way of saying, can you show us your battle scars?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tim.
You can start.
Tim, I'll start now, and then I'll pass it off to you. Those are great questions, and the whole concept, Tim and I have basically had conversations before, during, and after this whole process. Trying to come up with the priorities and the qualifications for the projects we're picking. Then the evaluation as we listen to people tell us we didn't pick them right. And then the end result is, well, what would we do different and how would we improve on it? Two of the things I think are probably the biggest criteria is from an engineering standpoint, what are the, I think what the focus was is what are the worst bridges? We're not just picking any bridges. We're trying to pick the worst bridges to bring them up. Ones that were open, that was one of the criteria, but open but not in good shape. But then the other side of it is the politics side. And that became a challenge as you're looking at, well, sometimes they were in conflict with each other. So what are you gonna do? And so I'll let Tim go ahead and talk about the criteria that was put together for the engineering side. And then we kind of then, I think, can go back and talk about how did that fit politically and you know, what are the choices. But I think if you're going to start a program like this, those are the two issues you're going to have. It's political. Well, I want one in my county, or I want one in my town. And maybe those counties don't need them. But then you got the other side where maybe some other counties did need some help, but they didn't have 200 of the worst bridges. So, you know, you got a balance that you got to look at. But I think the engineering decision, the actual engineering criteria was very well thought out. And I'll let Tim go ahead and talk about those.
We ODOT put a set of criteria together, and the first set of criteria was eligibility. And it was structured to have a great percentage of that eligibility on condition. We wanted to do the worst bridges in the state. And that was the direction from the governor, do the worst bridges in the state. Okay, so we put a criteria together to be eligible. It had to be structurally deficient, had to be open to traffic. It had to not be historic. And the historic part of it was because of environmental problems of getting historic projects done quickly. And the other was no large environmental problems, no wetlands, no preferably within the right of way, but even that was the first group only was within the right of way. So we established the criteria, and the criteria was based on information that's readily available in our inventory. ODOT keeps the inventory as IDOT does as well. So then we queried our data, and we can do that. We have lots of tools to do that. And as Andrea said, we had 900 to 1,000 bridges on that list of eligible. And these were all city and county owned. None of those were ODOT owned bridges. So okay, now we have all these bridges that are eligible. Now how do we rank them? And so we put a ranking equation together, and it was an equation, and we ranked them. I can share that. I can pass it on to Caitlin and give you those documents if you need them. But there was an equation, and it was strongly focused on condition. The worst conditions got more points got you in the top 200. And so we then ranked them, and then we did a fairly broad look at these projects from an environmental standpoint, from making sure that we weren't stepping in something, right? That we reviewed them all, and then we announced them. There was no part of this to spread the wealth. There was no discussions of spreading the wealth. That was, I took a number of shots on the chin from that, but our decision was, here's the criteria, here's the equation. and a number of county engineers told me I liked one county over another, and I told them no, I hated them all the same. So it was a challenge. That was a big challenge. There were some counties that got quite a few bridges, and we held the notion that these are the worst 200 bridges, and this is, we're going to start at the top and work our way down to the bottom. There were a few county engineers said, I'd rather do this one over here because of whatever reason than the one you've selected. Can I switch? And the answer was no. We're doing the 200 worst. If you don't want the bridge that we selected replaced, then we will throw it out and go down to the next one. It seemed pretty harsh and pretty rash, but what it did was is the expectations were there. The numbers were right in front of everybody, and it wasn't a subjective type of an issue. So that's how we did it. Like I said, I'll share with you. It'll go out with an email maybe. The criteria, but that was an Ohio criteria. It may not work in Illinois. It may not. So what we did was we said we're going to do the worst ones, and we defined what that meant. You may define it a little differently. That's you get a bunch of bridge engineers in a room and you can define it very easily. You'll come out of that room with an equation, and that's exactly what we did.
That's great. And you both are still standing.
Oh, and both like each other, so yeah, it's good.
Right.
But I will say, Tim, from an engineering standpoint, he did what he was supposed to do, and in the selection process and in the criteria set by the governor, and there was a very quick timeline for turning around these projects, so it wasn't like you could debate them for months on end. So. But what the criteria ended up doing was, and again, I was not promoting at all a spread the wealth, one per county as an example, because some counties just didn't need it. But there were some counties that probably could have used some help that didn't get any help from this program. And we had a couple counties, as Tim alluded to, that actually one county had over several dozen bridges in their county. And so when you look at the political side, some people were saying, well, gee, they just got rewarded for not trying to keep their bridges up to date. That's one of those, is it true or not? Don't know. They didn't have any money, so it was a very, very poor county. But it was something where I think it was still at the time the best solution we could have come up with. But as we look at it as a what would we do it again and how would we change it? I think the idea is you still are, if you're going to select the worst you can, you might limit by how many would go into one particular county, so that it's not a total distribution, but it's helping some of the mid counties that didn't get the benefit before. Now I will say some of those counties that didn't directly get these funds and get a new bridge out of it actually did benefit, because they were on a list that we have in the state and we put together this list of projects that are going to have some funding in near future years. If one of the 200 bridges was on that list, it came off the list, other counties moved up and were able to get funded with another source of funds where they wouldn't have been before. Right. So there's some benefits as you look at the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure an academic would love to test that freeloader theory and write a paper for TRB, right? But I think what you guys have described is like the process and the decision points that you get to make up the program. So I think that's really valuable, even if the equation is different for Illinois. And I guess now we'll pivot to the next question, which is really about the solicitation process, and then how does ODOT actually interact with the County Engineers Association. So Jeff and Michelle, I understand you two are the ones that are making the special sauce here for this program and are very close to the day-to-day activity. So can you walk us through what that solicitation process looks like, and then how do you two interact? Respectively, Jeff, you're at ODOT, and Michelle, you're at the County Engineers Association.
So I'll go ahead and kick it off, and Michelle can add to what I have to say. As Andrea had mentioned in her presentation, when this program first started off, ODOT selected those bridges, and as Tim elaborated on, we selected the bridges. about 2 years ago, we went to a solicitation process where we opened up an application period where the locals either, and it's not open only to the county engineers, it's also open to cities, municipalities, where they had a 45-day window where they could apply for funding through the Bridge Partnership Program. We open it up. We have some criteria to be eligible for the program. The bridges have to have a general appraisal 4 or less. They have to meet the federal definition of a bridge being 20 foot or greater, and they also have to be structurally deficient. So if they meet those 3 criteria, they can apply. Once we close that application period, internally at ODOT, we have a multidisciplinary team that basically looks at all these applications. We score them, we rank them, we review them. We do that not only in central office with our environmental folks, Tim's got some folks in his office that I work with, that they basically provide their expertise on, is this a good bridge? Is this a bridge that needs replaced, or is it one that could be prolonged with rehab? So we look at this internally. We have 12 district offices. I also have the districts go out and they do a field review of the structure that's being applied for, and they take a look and they provide their recommendations as well. So after we collate all this information, these scores, we gather all this, the recommendations, we put it all together, and we basically, I sit down and I put together a list of what I would recommend for our governance board, our executive management. That goes before our executive management board, the recommendations, and then basically there's typically there's a question Q&A back and forth of what about this bridge? Why was this bridge selected over another bridge? So we have that back and forth, and then we come down with an approved list of bridges that we fund for that given fiscal year.
Great.
Michelle, you want to add to that?
The only thing I want to add is that ODOT did give the County Engineers Association a chance to review the criteria. So we did have input in that, and we're very appreciative that they gave us that input. And then secondly, we don't really have a lot of involvement with the partnership program selection process. ODOT does that. But where Jeff and I work together mostly is to make sure, because we have our separate bridge program, the LBR program we call it, which is local bridge, to make sure that there's no overlap in projects there. So what they select for partnership program, we know is not going to end up in the LBR program. And there for a while, we did have a little bit of overlap. So we were able to, like Dean said, some of those bridges fell out of our program, and we were able to slide additional projects up to fill in those gaps. So it's more just a collaboration between the two of us to make sure that we're funding the best projects we can in both programs.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of coordination that takes place between Michelle and myself.
I can imagine you have many emails exchanged between the two of you. That's great. And have you guys worked together the entire time the program has been up in operation too?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
wow. Yeah.
So I've been with the local program since 2011, and Michelle and I have worked together in some capacity or another with the local programs ever since that point. So.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm sure that a long-standing relationship definitely helps. So that's wonderful. Well, actually, so speaking of county engineers, I have some questions. I got a note that Craig Fink has a couple of questions. So Craig, if you want to unmute yourself and chime in and ask your questions, you're more than welcome to.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, question I had, first of all, congratulations. It sounds like a successful program, and especially for our counterparts in Ohio and the County Engineers Association. In Illinois, we find ourselves in somewhat similar circumstances. We have the lion's share of bridges that we're responsible for, and we've got we have a bridge program for the townships, not for the counties or the cities, but just for the townships. It was fixed in 1979. It's never been increased since, so it's lagging, I would say, quite a bit. in looking at trying to come up with a list of the 200 worst condition bridges that would be eligible, so you're trying to come up with this eligible bridge list, how did you make your determination on potential environmental impacts where you might hit environmental snag and you want to avoid that? Was a large part of that on looking at whether you could replace it within existing right-of-way, as well as looking at your wetland maps and things of that nature, or was right-of-way not really that much of a consideration?
So I'm going to turn that over to Tim. Tim was kind of outlining everything that we did to select those projects. So Tim?
Yeah, luckily we had a very good environmentalist on the team as well. And she led us through making sure that we didn't step in anything. Now we ended up stepping in a few things with a couple of the projects, and it meant that we had to delay them to the last part of the program. But you know, the wetlands maps was huge. We looked for parks. We looked for, you know, Google Earth is a great tool. And we literally went, there was a group of us sitting in a conference room and we Google Earth every one of them. And so we made sure that there was no 4Fs, that there were any of the Fs, 4Fs, 6Fs, all the Fs. And we had, you know, our maps of problem children with a number of geographic or geology. There was, and so we tried not to fall into a pile that we knew about. So we literally threw those out. Like I said, there were a couple that we just didn't know. Oops. A couple of them we were able to work around from an engineering standpoint. So we filtered them. It was a fairly rough filter, but there was a filter.
And I think, Tim, I guess two other points. One is that was one of the reasons why originally we looked to stay within right-of-way, because we knew if you go outside the right-of-way, that automatically opens up different environmental reviews. So that was one of the criteria. And then the other one was, we really didn't mention this, I don't believe, but the bridges have to actually be open to traffic. Right, we didn't have any closed or removed bridges. It was open.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, and that on the staying within existing right-of-way, that's a huge trigger, and that's what I was looking for. I think in the presentation it mentioned relocated right-of-way, and I'm guessing that's the same thing when we say additional right-of-way. It's the same thing as saying relocating the right-of-way. Once you get outside of the existing established right-of-way, you're going to trigger every review there is, I believe.
Well, we did get outside the right of way. And as a matter of fact, we got a couple of bridges that the existing bridge was not in the right of way. And understand how that could happen is most of these bridges, you've got one or two farmers, right? And a lot of the county engineers go out and have a handshake and work it out with farmers. And so ODOT doesn't work that way. So we did get into right of way. It didn't preclude it. It didn't preclude being in the program. It just meant that there was a couple more steps we had to take, and we couldn't include those in the first phase. That first phase, the first 20 bridges, we did in record time, and that was something that I'm very proud of. How quickly we turned around those first 20 projects. It was all hands on deck, and we gave the contractors, it was all design build, so we gave the contractors a preliminary site plan. We gave them we did borings. We gave them a set of borings and we cleared it. Most of these are CE1s, so it was environmentally cleared. One of the challenges and one of the lessons learned is we didn't put enough emphasis on utilities. The utilities got in the way of a number of projects, moving overhead lines, not knowing we had some buried gas lines. There were some, the biggest challenges we had were utilities.
Okay, thank you. And if I,
just to add to that, although I do believe in a handshake is good enough, we do handshakes. We follow the right criteria, but realizing most of these structures were built in the 1910s, 1920s, farmers at that time, they didn't, there was no temporary, they didn't care if it was built on their property, they just said, go ahead and build it. You know, if the wing wall sticks over, it's helping them. So that's, some of that history is what we have to deal with when we're coming back to replace a bridge.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that. And basically, if it's in Illinois, if it's been there longer than 15 years, you've already got the rights by prescriptive easement, even though you don't have a dedicated right-of-way. So, so looking at staying within an existing right-of-way, when you're trying to create the list and say what are the neediest and which ones can we move quickly, you really look to say, hey, can we replace this with something and still be within existing right-of-way? It clears at least the environmental and all the other cultural types of clearances. But I understand looking at everything else. When it comes to the multi-jurist or the team that looked at this from all these different angles, was there a expedited pathway for those that needed clearance because of this funding source and this effort? In other words, right now, if I have a bridge come up with any regular funding source in Illinois and I want to move it forward, it might be 8 months to get an answer back on some, environmental, cultural, et cetera, type of detail as it goes through the clearance process. Because of the particular funding on this effort in Ohio, did you have any kind of expedited process for those projects that ODOT set up or paved the way ahead of time?
So are you saying from an environmental perspective?
From any perspective, any potential hurdle. Environmental be number one, but any other type of hurdle?
So, I mean, really, it was the process we're all familiar with. It was just compressed. And because we picked those projects that had no impacts or minimal impacts, we were able to get that first year of 2014 through very quickly. And like I talked about earlier, the more complicated, we had complicated projects. We had detours and like Tim said, utilities and gas lines and all sorts of things, but we had more time with 2015, 16, and 17 to actually develop those projects. They were still on a fast track, but it had a more realistic pace with what you would expect with a standard project in any given fiscal year.
If you want to know what the actual impetus was for getting it done quickly, it's when the governor says he wants it done quickly. That pretty much speeds things up.
That was my suspicion. Thanks, Dean. I think that answers my questions. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Craig. And I just want to circle back to a question that Ben had asked, asking about how smaller contractors were engaged and how bidding was approached. Ben, did we sufficiently answer your question? I don't know if he's still on the line. No problem. Well, anyway, I think we did, but I just wanted to double check. Are there others on the line that have any questions? Okay, well, I have a question that I'm going to direct to Andrea first, and then if others in the Ohio group want to respond as well, they're welcome to. So Andrea, you touched on the lessons learned in your presentation, and you also highlighted too, like the cost savings, schedule savings or schedule acceleration that was achieved through the program. And I'm kind of curious, from your vantage point, if you were at a different state DOT and they're about to start a program like this and working in a totally different state, what would you do first? Like, how would you bring those lessons learned? How did they come to bear? How would you start? What do you think is important?
I guess there's two things, and then I will probably punt to Tim or Dean. First of all, understand what the need is out there and what really the conditions are and what your population of bridges looks like. And I think understanding that and having the funding in the background to help with that were like two key components, but the other component was really working with the stakeholders. And so typically, and I think you're off to a great start in Illinois, the DOT can't do it all alone and the locals can't do it all alone and the CEAO can't necessarily do it. So it's coming together. And if you have to seek that funding from the legislature, you build a coalition, you go together and you get all on the same page and say, this is what we want to accomplish and this is how we need your help. And this is how we need to fill that missing gap, which, the gap may be funding, it may be a variety of resources, but doing what you're starting to do in Illinois and build that coalition to either go seek the funding, understand the data, and move forward from there. So anybody else can chime in?
Well, I would like to add, and it hasn't been said, but it could probably be implied, that this wasn't a matter of, oh, counties need some additional bridge money. Let's take some money out of, Peter's pocket to pay Paul. The idea was everybody's short of funds. So it wasn't trying to, we needed additional funds. So part of that was the innovative ways that Ohio did get those additional funds. And it's the same logic that we use when we have to go for an additional gas tax or permissive license plate fees. It's not a matter of we'll take it from townships and put it in counties. That's not the point. It's everybody needed some additional funds to get the programs going. So when you're looking at a bridge bundling partnership program, the idea is to try to help leverage those additional funds.
From a DOT standpoint, I put it in some very simple terms, at least in my life. When Dad says get it done, you go get it done. And the governor came in and said, there will not be a bridge failure on my watch. And this was just after I-35W, right? That was a pretty dramatic bridge failure in the United States. And it kind of put a mindset in people's minds and a question, are our bridges safe? And so the governor came in and said, that won't happen in Ohio. And he backed it up with $100 million to say, okay, where do we need to put this? And the answer to that was obvious on the local system. So when Dad says do it, it gets done.
And Tim still has a job, so we know it works.
That's great. Excellent. Well, I've got another question here from the group. So you mentioned, Andrea, that in phase 1, the program covered 100% of the project costs, and then in the later phases required a local match. So, are the projects that are currently funded, are they through the design process, and is that completely funded by the locals? Or maybe, Andrea, I don't know if you're the right person or if someone else is the right person.
So actually, I'm going to punt this question to Jeff Payton, since he handles the program now, and he can respond to that.
Great.
So to answer that, we require it with the current program. We fund only the construction and construction engineering phases. So when they apply for a bridge, typically they may have it already under design. Most typically it's not. It's a project that they would like to do. So once they receive funding and they know that they're going to have that funding for the construction phase, at that point, either internally or they'll go and hire a consultant to start the design and preliminary engineering phases.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions from the group?
Yeah, this is Scott. The question I have is, as Jeff ran down the criteria, structurally deficient, was there any part of or the equation that Tim talked about that addressed economic development as opposed to just AADT? In rural areas, it's not always that population count, but the farmland or the proximity to a terminal or that value that contributes to the asset, as opposed to, and could be very seasonal. So the average obscures what might otherwise be the value that you'd look at on a sheet of paper.
I'll take that one. The answer to that is the closest we came to an economic impact was ADT, and it was a very small piece of the equation. Again, we were focused on the worst bridges, the worst condition bridges, and so economic impact we did not have as part of the equation.
So just the physical structure as a matter of the worst.
That's correct. The physical condition, that's correct.
Because it could certainly be argued that the economic impact is a part of it being posted, maybe not severe structurally deficient, but limiting to the point where the out of route, the adverse travel is consequential to the selection or the prioritization.
So Scott, on the current program, our part of our solicitation, our part of the scoring after we receive the applications, we have an other factors category. So we look at the general appraisal, we look at the deck summary, the load weight, the ADT, the economic health of an area, but then we have an area where not only myself but the districts can also award points based on some other factors. Some of those other factors are going to be, is if this bridge is nearing closure, what kind of impact is that closure going to have on the county? Is that going to then require a 20-mile runaround for emergency crews? Is that going to create a huge detour for school buses or any other services like that? So there is a category, we apply points, we give points for those other factors, and I think that's where that type of thing would fall into.
Yeah, thank
you. So it is definitely something that's taken into consideration when we get that list. We get $5 million a year now for the program. When we get that list down to the $8 or $9, $10 million range, we're looking to how do we squeeze that down to a program that we can fund for that given fiscal year. That's when we start to really look into what are the impacts going to be on that geographical area, that county.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, we're pretty much at the end of the call here. Are there any other final questions? Great. Well, I just really want to thank the Ohio County Engineers Association, as well as the Ohio Department of Transportation. Oh, wait, I got a question. Hold on. That always happens. You're supposed to wait 10 seconds, to ensure that like your audience has ample time to respond, but I'm a little jumped the gun there. This question is, were any of the bridges township owned?
No, not that I was aware of, but maybe Tim,
That's a difference in state law. The townships don't own bridges in Ohio. Those are county responsible. So we only have our county engineers own bridges, our cities own bridges, Turnpike own bridges, ODOT owns bridges, and then there's private bridges, and that's it. So the townships don't own bridges, are not responsible for bridges in Ohio.
Excellent, thanks. Any other questions? I don't know if I can wait those 10 seconds, so. Great, well, like I was saying, thanks very much to the Ohio County Engineers Association for participating, as well as the folks from the Ohio Department of Transportation. It was really, truly a privilege to have you on the call here and just explain. You guys gave us a wonderful insight into how the program came together and then is executed on a year-to-year basis. So thank you very much. So for everybody else on the call, we will distribute the PowerPoint as well as the contact information for those that are that were speaking on the call today too, if you have other questions. And then of course, us at WSP, we're happy to field any questions that you may have. Scott, I'll sign you up for questions as well on behalf of the Illinois Soybean Association. And we'll be meeting as a working group again July 23rd. So you should anticipate a calendar invitation on that. And I also want to do one last plug. We will be sending out the Metro Quest, so I hope that's burned into your memory so you don't delete it. A Metro Quest survey. The survey is completely confidential. We're going to be using the results to inform the rest of the work that the working group is doing, and that will be really helpful. Again, totally confidential. If you have any questions, there's going to be a number listed on that link that goes to Adam here at WSP, and he's happy to help troubleshoot. But if you have questions or want to distribute to others, feel free to contact any of us on the WSP team. So with that, Jamie, is there any other items that we need to cover before we conclude the call?
No, Kate, you covered it all very much. So thank you.
Great, excellent. Yeah, thanks to everybody who participated today. Have a great afternoon.
Yes, thank you all very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.